Clara and Theo, two peas in a pod, were as close as siblings could be. They did everything together, from building elaborate Lego castles in their living room to staging backyard circuses for the neighborhood kids. But what they loved most was exploring. Their small town was surrounded by woods, fields, and winding creeks, all begging to be discovered. Clara, the elder by 2 years at 10, was the planner and the slightly more cautious one. Theo, a whirlwind of boundless energy at 8, was always ready to leap headfirst into any adventure. Their bond wasn't just typical sibling affection, it was a deep-seated understanding, a shared language of secret jokes and knowing glances. They were each other's confidants, protectors, and best friends. If one scraped a knee, the other felt the sting. If one was scared of the dark, the other held their hand a little tighter. This unwavering connection made their adventures all the more special, a joint expedition into the unknown with a built-in safety net. Their parents encouraged their curiosity, within reason. They were allowed to roam the woods behind their house, as long as they stayed within earshot and were home before dusk. But there was one place that was strictly off-limits, Redwood Hollow. Redwood Hollow was a dense, ancient forest on the outskirts of town. It wasn't just the towering redwood trees that gave it its name, it was also the palpable sense of unease that permeated the air. Even on the sunniest days, Redwood Hollow seemed shrouded in shadow, its depths concealing secrets best left undisturbed. Locals whispered stories of strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances, and an overall feeling of being watched. It was a place where compasses spun wildly, cell phones lost signal, and the wind seemed to whisper forgotten names. But to Clara and Theo, Redwood Hollow was a challenge, a forbidden fruit just waiting to be tasted. It was a mystery they were determined to solve together. The stories surrounding Redwood Hollow were enough to make even the bravest adults shudder. Old Man Withers, who lived on the edge of town, claimed to have seen glowing eyes watching him from the trees one night. Sarah Miller, a high schooler, swore she heard someone whispering her name as she walked past the entrance. And then there were the disappearances. Over the years, several people had ventured into Redwood Hollow and never returned. A hiker in the 1970s, a group of teenagers in the 1990s, and even a park ranger just a few years prior. Each case remained unsolved, adding to the forest's dark mystique. The official explanation was always the same: accidents, getting lost, or encounters with wildlife. But the locals knew better. They spoke of a malevolent force, an ancient spirit that dwelled within the trees, preying on the unwary. Some said it was the ghost of a lumberjack killed in a logging accident, forever seeking revenge on those who trespassed on his land. Others believed it was a more primordial entity, a guardian of the forest protecting its secrets from the outside world. Whatever the truth, Redwood Hollow was a place to be avoided. Parents warned their children to stay away, and even the bravest hunters wouldn't venture into its depths. The air itself felt different near Redwood Hollow, heavy and still, as if the forest was holding its breath. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, casting long, distorted shadows that played tricks on the eyes. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional caw of a crow. Even the animals seemed to avoid it. Birdsong was scarce, and deer tracks were rarely seen. It was as if the forest itself was repelling life, creating a vacuum of emptiness and dread. The trees themselves seemed to lean inwards, their branches gnarled and twisted like skeletal fingers, reaching out to ensnare anyone who dared to enter. And at night, the forest was said to glow with an eerie, phosphorescent light, a beacon luring unsuspecting victims to their doom. It was a place where nightmares became reality, and where the line between the real and the imagined blurred into nothingness. It was a place that called to Clara and Theo, daring them to unravel its mysteries. "It's just stories, Theo," Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. They were sitting on a fallen log at the edge of Redwood Hollow, the air noticeably colder than in the surrounding woods. Old wives' tales to scare kids. Theo kicked at the dirt with his worn sneakers. But what about the people who disappeared? The ranger, the teenagers, they didn't just vanish into thin air. Maybe they got lost, Clara reasoned, though she knew it sounded weak even to her own ears. Or maybe they had accidents. The forest can be dangerous. Theo shook his head, his eyes fixed on the dark expanse of trees. I don't believe it. I think there's something else going on in there. That was precisely what worried Clara. Theo's imagination was as vast and untamed as Redwood Hollow itself. He had a knack for seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary, for finding magic in the mundane. It was a quality she usually admired, but in this case, it made her uneasy. We shouldn't be here, she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Mom and Dad would be furious if they knew. That's why we're not going to tell them, Theo replied, a mischievous glint in his eyes. We'll just take a quick peek. See what all the fuss is about. Prove that it's just a normal forest. Clara hesitated. A part of her wanted to turn around and go home, to forget all about Redwood Hollow and its spooky stories. But another part of her, the adventurous spirit she shared with Theo, couldn't resist the challenge. She couldn't let the forest intimidate her. Besides, she couldn't let Theo go in alone. Okay, she agreed, her voice barely a whisper. But we stick together. And we don't go too far. Just until we can see what's so special about it. Theo grinned, his face lighting up with excitement. Deal. He scrambled to his feet and started towards the trees, his youthful enthusiasm overriding any sense of caution. Clara followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. As they stepped into the shadows of Redwood Hollow, a chill ran down her spine, a feeling that they were crossing a threshold, entering a place from which there might be no return. The adventure had begun, but a sense of dread had also settled in, a premonition that this was more than just a simple exploration. This was a journey into the heart of darkness. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The towering redwood trees blocked out most of the sunlight, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a musty odor that clung to their clothes and filled their nostrils. Clara felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that they were being watched. Theo, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you sure about this? It feels weird. Theo didn't answer. He was walking ahead, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening to something. Theo. Clara repeated, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched at her touch, turning to face her with a puzzled expression. Did you hear that? He asked. Hear what? Someone's calling my name, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. It's faint, but I can hear it. Clara strained her ears, but all she could hear was the rustling of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. I don't hear anything, Theo. You're just imagining things. No, I'm not, he insisted, his voice becoming more urgent. Listen. It's getting louder. He closed his eyes, his face contorted in concentration. Clara watched him, her anxiety growing with each passing second. She didn't like this. She didn't like the way Theo was acting. It was as if he were being drawn into something she couldn't see or understand. Theo, we need to go back, she pleaded, grabbing his hand. This isn't fun anymore. I don't like this place. He pulled his hand away, his eyes still closed. Just a minute, he said. I think I can make out what they're saying. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, to drag Theo out of the forest kicking and screaming. But she was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear and a growing sense of helplessness. She knew, deep down, that something terrible was about to happen. Something that would change their lives forever. The forest was closing in around them, the shadows deepening, the voices growing stronger. And Theo was listening. He was listening to something that Clara couldn't hear, something that was calling him away. The voices grew louder, coalescing into a chorus of whispers that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. They were sweet, melodic, and undeniably calling Theo's name. He swayed slightly, his eyes now wide and unfocused, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Theo! Stop it!" Clara screamed, finally breaking free from her paralysis. She lunged forward and grabbed his arm, pulling him back towards her with all her might. But it was no use. Theo was like a puppet, his body moving against her will, drawn forward by an invisible force. He stumbled through the undergrowth, his eyes fixed on something beyond her sight. "Theo, please! What's happening to you?" Clara cried, her voice cracking with fear. She tugged and pulled, but he was too strong, or perhaps, something else was lending him strength. Suddenly, he stopped. He stood perfectly still, his head cocked to one side as if listening to a particularly intriguing piece of music. Then, he laughed. It wasn't his usual playful giggle, but a high-pitched, almost manic sound that sent shivers down Clara's spine. "They want me to come," he said, his voice sounding distant and hollow. "They have something to show me." Before Clara could react, Theo turned and darted into the dense foliage. He moved with unnatural speed, weaving through the trees as if he knew exactly where he was going. "Theo! No! Come back!" Clara screamed, her voice echoing through the silent forest. She scrambled after him, pushing through thick branches and tripping over tangled roots. But he was already disappearing into the gloom, his laughter fading into the distance. Clara ran as fast as she could, her lungs burning, her legs aching. But it was no use. The forest seemed to be working against her, snagging her clothes, tripping her feet, and disorienting her senses. She could hear Theo's laughter, still faint but undeniably there, beckoning her deeper into the woods. But she couldn't see him. He had vanished, swallowed whole by the ancient, malevolent forest. Finally, she collapsed to the ground, exhausted and terrified. "Theo!" she screamed one last time, her voice hoarse and desperate. But only silence answered her call. He was gone. The forest had taken him. And Clara was alone. Hours later, Clara stumbled out of the woods. She didn't remember how she got there. One moment she was lost and alone, the next she was blinking in the harsh sunlight at the edge of Redwood Hollow. Her clothes were torn, her hair was matted with leaves and dirt, and her feet were bare and bleeding. She had lost her shoes somewhere in the frantic chase after Theo. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional trauma she had endured. She was shivering uncontrollably, not just from the cold but from the sheer terror of what had happened. Her mind was a whirlwind of fragmented images, Theo's vacant eyes, his eerie laughter, the whispering voices, the suffocating darkness of the forest. She tried to speak, to call out for help, but her voice was gone, lost somewhere in the depths of Redwood Hollow. All that came out was a choked sob. A passing motorist saw her and stopped to help. He wrapped her in a blanket and called the police. When they arrived, Clara was unable to answer their questions. She could only stare blankly ahead, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. She was taken to the local hospital, where doctors examined her and tried to calm her down. But she remained unresponsive, trapped in her own private nightmare. The police tried to piece together what had happened. They searched Redwood Hollow, but found no trace of Theo. Clara was the only witness, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't tell them about the voices, about the way Theo had been lured away, about the feeling of malevolent presence that permeated the forest. All she could do was shiver and stare, her silence speaking volumes about the horror she had experienced. The doctors diagnosed her with acute stress disorder and kept her under observation. They hoped that with time and therapy, she would be able to recover and recount what had happened. But deep down, Clara knew that she would never be the same. The forest had taken more than just Theo, it had taken a part of her as well. A part that would forever remain lost in the shadows of Redwood Hollow. The silence that now consumed her was a testament to the profound and irreversible damage she had suffered. The forest had not only stolen her brother, but her voice, her innocence, and her peace of mind. The disappearance of Theo became a media frenzy. News vans lined the streets of their quiet town, and reporters hounded Clara's parents for information. The police launched a full-scale search of Redwood Hollow, using dogs, helicopters, and teams of volunteers. They combed through the undergrowth, searched the creeks, and even rappelled down the steep cliffs. But they found nothing. No sign of Theo, no trace of his clothing, no clue as to what had happened to him. Clara, still unable to speak, became the center of the investigation. Detectives visited her at the hospital, showing her pictures of Theo, asking her questions she couldn't answer. They tried to get her to draw what she had seen, to point out the location where Theo had disappeared, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on some unseen horror. Frustrated by the lack of progress, the police turned to the media, hoping that public pressure would yield some new leads. They released a sketch of Theo, along with a description of his clothing and a plea for anyone with information to come forward. The story was picked up by national news outlets, and soon Theo's face was plastered on television screens and newspapers across the country. Clara watched the news reports with a growing sense of despair. She wanted to tell them what had happened, to explain about the voices and the way Theo had been lured away. But the words wouldn't come. She felt trapped, as if she were watching a movie of her own life, unable to intervene or change the outcome. As the days turned into weeks, the initial enthusiasm for the search began to wane. The police scaled back their efforts, the media moved on to other stories, and the volunteers returned to their normal lives. But Clara refused to give up hope. She knew that Theo was still out there, somewhere in the depths of Redwood Hollow. And she was determined to find him, no matter how long it took. She started to draw maps of the forest from memory, marking the places where she and Theo had explored, the spots where she had last seen him. She tried to guide the search parties, leading them through the dense undergrowth, pointing out landmarks she remembered. But the forest seemed to shift and change, disorienting her senses and leading them in circles. The deeper they went, the more confused she became, until finally, the police gave up, convinced that she was too traumatized to be of any help. But Clara knew that she was the only one who could find Theo. She was the only one who knew the truth about what had happened in Redwood Hollow. And she would never stop searching until she brought him home. The official search for Theo was called off after 3 months. The police had exhausted all leads, and the evidence suggested that he was either lost, injured, or, worst of all, dead. Clara's parents, though heartbroken, began to accept the grim reality. They held a memorial service for Theo, a somber affair attended by family, friends, and members of the community. But Clara refused to participate. She couldn't bring herself to believe that Theo was gone. She knew, with every fiber of her being, that he was still alive. As the months passed, Clara slowly began to regain her voice. The trauma of what had happened in Redwood Hollow had left her scarred, but her determination to find Theo was stronger than ever. She started to visit the forest every day, searching for any sign of him. She followed the same trails they had taken before, calling out his name, listening for any response. She studied the forest, learning its secrets, its rhythms, its hidden pathways. She became an expert tracker, able to identify animal prints, broken branches, and other subtle signs that indicated someone had passed through. Her parents worried about her, but they couldn't stop her. They knew that searching for Theo was the only thing that kept her going. They watched her disappear into the forest each morning, her face etched with a mixture of hope and determination, and prayed for her safe return. Clara's search became a solitary obsession. She spent hours in the forest, alone with her thoughts and memories. She talked to the trees, whispered to the wind, and pleaded with the forest to give Theo back. Sometimes, she thought she heard him calling her name, a faint echo in the distance. But when she followed the sound, it always led her nowhere. The locals whispered about her, calling her the girl who talks to the trees. Some pitied her, others mocked her, but Clara didn't care. She was driven by a force stronger than fear, stronger than grief, stronger than despair. She was driven by love. A love for her brother that transcended the boundaries of time and space. And she knew, deep down, that one day she would find him. One day, she would bring Theo home. No matter how long it took. Redwood Hollow would not keep him forever. She would make sure of it. And then there was the laughter. It started subtly, a mere whisper on the wind, so faint that Clara initially dismissed it as her imagination. But as time went on, it became more distinct, more persistent. It was Theo's laughter, unmistakable and clear, echoing through the trees. At first, it brought her joy, a fleeting moment of connection with her lost brother. It was as if he was still with her, playing hide-and-seek in the forest, his laughter guiding her closer to him. But the joy soon turned to torment. The laughter was always just out of reach, always fading away before she could pinpoint its source. It was a cruel trick, a siren's call leading her deeper and deeper into the labyrinthine woods. Sometimes, she would chase after the laughter, running blindly through the undergrowth, her heart pounding with hope. But she would always end up alone, surrounded by the silent trees, the laughter mocking her from a distance. It was a constant reminder of her failure, her inability to save Theo, her helplessness against the power of the forest. The laughter became her constant companion, a haunting melody that played on repeat in her mind. It was there when she woke up in the morning, there when she went to sleep at night, there during every moment of her solitary search. It was a reminder of what she had lost, a symbol of her unending grief. She tried to ignore it, to block it out, but it was no use. The laughter was a part of the forest, woven into the fabric of the trees, carried on the wind, echoing in her soul. It was a constant presence, a reminder of her guilt. If only she had been stronger, if only she had stopped Theo from entering the forest, if only she had been able to save him. The laughter was a constant reminder of her failure. It was a punishment for her recklessness, her naivete, her inability to protect her brother. But even as it tormented her, it also gave her strength. It was a reminder of why she was searching, of what she was fighting for. It was a connection to Theo, a sign that he was still out there, waiting to be found. And as long as she could hear his laughter, she would never give up. She would continue to search, to hope, to believe. Until the day she brought him home. Or the day the laughter finally faded away forever. Years drifted by, blurring into a monotonous cycle of searching, hoping, and despairing. The little girl who had stumbled out of Redwood Hollow, barefoot and silent, was now a young woman, her face etched with the lines of grief and determination. The town had long since moved on, the memory of Theo fading into a local legend, another cautionary tale whispered around campfires. But Clara never forgot. She still lived in her childhood home, taking care of her aging parents. The house was filled with memories of Theo, his drawings on the refrigerator, his baseball glove in the corner, his favorite books on the shelf. Clara kept everything exactly as he had left it, as if he might walk through the door at any moment. During the day, she worked at the local library, surrounded by books and silence. It was a peaceful job, allowing her to escape into other worlds, to forget, if only for a little while, the pain of her loss. But as soon as her shift ended, she would return to Redwood Hollow, drawn back to the forest like a moth to a flame. She knew the forest intimately now. She knew every tree, every rock, every stream. She knew the animals that lived there, the birds that sang, the insects that buzzed. She had become a part of the forest, as much as it had become a part of her. The locals still whispered about her, but they no longer mocked her. They had come to respect her unwavering dedication, her refusal to give up hope. They saw her as a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of love. She was no longer the frightened little girl who had been swallowed by the forest. She was a warrior, a survivor, a force to be reckoned with. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, more determined than ever. And she still heard the laughter. It was fainter now, more elusive, but it was still there. A constant reminder of Theo, a beacon guiding her through the darkness. She knew that as long as she could hear his laughter, she would never be truly lost. She would continue to search, to hope, to believe. Until the day she found him. Or until the day the forest claimed her as well. Either way, she would never give up. Theo was her brother, and she would never abandon him. Not now, not ever. Redwood Hollow may have taken him, but it would never break their bond. Their love was stronger than any darkness, more enduring than any legend. And one day, she would prove it. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the leaves crunched beneath her worn boots, Clara stumbled upon something that sent a jolt of electricity through her weary heart. It was a small, tarnished metal toy soldier, half buried in the dirt near a gnarled old oak tree. It was one of Theo's. She knew it instantly. He had a whole collection of them, meticulously painted and arranged in elaborate battle formations on his bedroom floor. This particular soldier, a grenadier with a missing arm, had been his favorite. Clara picked it up, her fingers trembling. It was the first tangible clue she had found in years, a sign that Theo had been in this part of the forest. A wave of hope washed over her, momentarily eclipsing the years of disappointment and despair. This wasn't just a random object, it was a piece of Theo, a fragment of his past, a beacon pointing her in the right direction. She looked around, her eyes scanning the surrounding area. The ground was covered in a thick layer of leaves, making it difficult to see any other signs. But Clara knew that Theo wouldn't have just dropped the toy soldier and moved on. He would have been playing with it, perhaps staging a battle against the forces of the forest. She started to search more carefully, her eyes fixed on the ground. She moved slowly, methodically, brushing away the leaves, examining every inch of the area. And then she saw it. A faint indentation in the dirt, a small footprint that was almost completely obscured by the leaves. It was too small to be an adult's, too large to be an animal's. It had to be Theo's. Clara followed the footprint, her heart pounding with excitement. It led her deeper into the forest, away from the familiar trails, into a part of Redwood Hollow she had never explored before. The trees grew closer together, the undergrowth became thicker, and the air grew colder. But Clara didn't care. She was on Theo's trail, and she wouldn't let anything stop her. As she ventured deeper, the laughter grew louder, more distinct than she had heard it in years. It was as if Theo was calling to her, guiding her closer to him. She quickened her pace, her senses heightened, her determination renewed. She was getting closer. She could feel it. Theo was waiting for her. And she was finally going to find him. After all these years, she was finally going to bring him home. The toy soldier was more than just a clue, it was a promise. A promise that she would never give up, that she would never stop searching, that she would always love him. And that one day, they would be together again. The trail led Clara to a hidden clearing, a place untouched by sunlight, where the air hung heavy and still. The trees formed a natural amphitheater, their branches intertwining to create a canopy that blocked out the sky. In the center of the clearing stood a massive redwood tree, its trunk wider than any she had ever seen. It was ancient, its bark gnarled and twisted, its branches reaching towards the heavens like supplicating arms. This place felt different. The usual sounds of the forest were absent here. There were no birds singing, no insects buzzing, no wind rustling through the leaves. Only silence. A deep, profound silence that pressed in on her ears and made her skin crawl. And the voices. They were louder here, clearer, more distinct. They were no longer whispers, but full-throated calls, beckoning her closer. Clara hesitated at the edge of the clearing, a sense of unease washing over her. This place felt sacred, forbidden, as if she were trespassing on hallowed ground. But the laughter was so close now, so tantalizingly near. She couldn't turn back. She had to know what was waiting for her in the center of the clearing. She took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing, her eyes fixed on the massive redwood tree. As she approached, she noticed something strange. Carved into the bark of the tree were hundreds of names, etched into the wood with painstaking detail. Some were old and faded, barely legible, others were more recent, fresh and raw. Clara reached out and touched one of the names, her fingers tracing the familiar letters. It was Theo's name, carved into the tree in his childish scrawl. Her heart lurched. He had been here. But when? And why? As she looked closer, she noticed something else. Beneath Theo's name was another carving, a symbol she recognized from one of his favorite books, a Celtic knot representing eternity. And beneath the Celtic knot, another name. Her name. Clara gasped, her mind reeling. What did it all mean? Why were their names carved into this tree? Why was this place so silent, so eerie, so powerful? She looked around, her eyes searching for answers. And then she saw it. A small, wooden flute lying at the base of the tree. It was one of Theo's old toys. He used to play it all the time, filling the house with its sweet, melancholic melodies. Clara picked it up, her fingers tracing its smooth, worn surface. As she held it, a vision flashed before her eyes. A memory, a glimpse into the past. She saw Theo standing in this clearing, his eyes wide with wonder, his face illuminated by a strange, ethereal light. He was laughing. And then, he was gone. Clara stumbled back, her mind reeling. She understood now. This place was a nexus, a gateway, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. The voices, the laughter, the names carved into the tree, it was all connected. Redwood Hollow wasn't just a forest. It was something more. Something ancient, something powerful, something magical. And Theo was trapped here, caught between worlds, waiting to be rescued. The vision faded, leaving Clara breathless and disoriented. The flute felt warm in her hand, pulsing with a strange energy. She looked around the clearing, her eyes scanning the names carved into the tree. She realized that many of them were the names of people who had disappeared in Redwood Hollow over the years. They were all trapped here, their souls caught between worlds, their stories etched into the bark of the ancient tree. Clara knew what she had to do. She had to find a way to break the spell, to free Theo and the others from their prison. But how? She had no idea where to start. She was just a girl, armed with nothing but her love for her brother and a handful of clues. How could she possibly hope to defeat the power of Redwood Hollow? As she stood there, a voice echoed in her mind. It wasn't one of the sweet, melodic voices that had lured Theo away. This voice was different. It was ancient, powerful, and resonated deep within her soul. It was the voice of the forest itself. You seek to break the spell, the voice said, its words echoing through the clearing. But are you willing to pay the price? Clara trembled, but she stood her ground. What price? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The forest demands a sacrifice, the voice replied. To free those who are trapped here, you must offer something of equal value. Clara's heart sank. What could she possibly offer that would be of equal value to a human life? Her possessions? Her memories? Her soul? What do you want? She asked, her voice filled with dread. The voice was silent for a moment, and then it spoke again. The forest wants what it has already taken from you, it said. Your fear. Clara frowned. My fear? Yes, the voice replied. Your fear is what binds you to this place, what keeps you from seeing the truth. To free Theo, you must confront your fear, you must embrace the darkness, you must become one with the forest. Clara hesitated. She had spent her entire life running from her fear, trying to forget the horrors she had witnessed in Redwood Hollow. How could she possibly embrace it? How could she become one with the darkness that had taken her brother away? But she knew that she had no choice. If she wanted to save Theo, she had to do whatever it took, even if it meant facing her greatest fears. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and surrendered herself to the voice. She let the darkness wash over her, embracing the fear, the grief, the pain. And as she did, she saw a vision. She saw Theo standing in the clearing, his eyes wide with wonder. The voices were calling to him, beckoning him closer. He reached out his hand, and a beam of light enveloped him, lifting him up into the sky. He was laughing. And then, he was gone. Clara opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She understood now. Theo hadn't been taken by the forest. He had chosen to go. He had been drawn to the light, to the promise of something better. And she had to let him go. She had to release her fear, her guilt, her need to control. She had to trust that he was where he was meant to be. She took a deep breath and smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was also a smile of acceptance, of understanding, of peace. She was finally ready to let go. And as she did, the forest began to change. The darkness receded, the silence lifted, and the sounds of the forest returned. The birds began to sing, the insects began to buzz, and the wind began to rustle through the leaves. The spell was broken. The lost souls were free. And Theo was finally at peace. Clara turned and walked out of the clearing, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She knew that she would never forget Theo, but she also knew that she had to move on. She had to live her life, to embrace the future, to honor his memory. Redwood Hollow was no longer a place of fear and darkness. It was a place of healing, of transformation, of hope. And Clara was finally free. But the laughter still echoed through the trees. It was fainter now, a mere whisper on the wind, but it was still there. And Clara knew that she could never truly leave Redwood Hollow behind. It was a part of her, as much as she was a part of it. She continued to visit the forest, not as a desperate searcher, but as a caretaker, a guardian of its secrets. She walked the trails, tending to the trees, listening to the wind, and remembering Theo. She told stories to the children who dared to venture into the woods, sharing the legends of Redwood Hollow, warning them of its dangers, and reminding them of its beauty. She became a living legend herself, the woman of the woods, a symbol of resilience, of love, of hope. Some said she was crazy, lost in her own world, still clinging to a ghost. But others saw her as a wise woman, a seer, a conduit to the other world. And the laughter, it changed over time. It was no longer a tormenting echo, but a gentle melody, a sweet reminder of the bond she shared with her brother. It was the sound of his joy, his freedom, his peace. One day, as she walked through the clearing, she saw a young boy standing beneath the ancient redwood tree. He was about 8 years old, with bright eyes and a mischievous grin. He reminded her of Theo. "Are you the woman of the woods?" he asked. Clara smiled. "Some people call me that," she replied. "My name is Theo," he said. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She looked at the boy, her eyes searching his face. He smiled, and she saw a flash of recognition, a spark of something familiar. "It's nice to meet you, Theo," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. The boy smiled again, and then he turned and ran off into the forest, his laughter echoing through the trees. Clara watched him go, tears streaming down her face. She knew that she would never truly find Theo, not in this world. But she also knew that he was never truly gone. He was always with her, in her heart, in her memories, in the laughter that echoed through the trees. She took a deep breath and turned towards home, her heart filled with peace. She had made her choice. She had chosen to live, to love, to remember. And she knew that Theo would always be with her, guiding her, protecting her, and laughing with her, until the end of time. The forest had given her back something more valuable than her brother. It had given her herself. Or perhaps that wasn't the end at all. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, when the moon was hidden behind a veil of clouds and the wind howled through the trees, Clara would find herself drawn back to the clearing. She would stand beneath the ancient redwood, listening to the whispers of the forest, feeling the presence of the lost souls. And she would hear the laughter. It wasn't the gentle melody she had come to know, but a wild, untamed sound, filled with both joy and sorrow. It was the laughter of Theo, calling to her, beckoning her closer. And sometimes, she would answer. She would step off the familiar trail, venturing deeper into the woods, following the sound of his laughter. She would lose herself in the darkness, embracing the mystery, surrendering to the magic of Redwood Hollow. Some said she was searching for Theo, still clinging to the hope that she could somehow bring him back. Others said she was searching for herself, seeking to reconnect with the part of her that had been lost in the forest so many years ago. But perhaps she was searching for something else entirely. Perhaps she was searching for the truth, for the answer to the question that had haunted her for so long: what really happened to Theo? Did he find peace in the light, or was he still trapped between worlds, waiting to be rescued? Was he happy, or was he lost and alone? Clara didn't know the answer, and perhaps she never would. But she couldn't.